4 years, we've done monthly, sometimes twice a month, these conversations with people who know certain lot of things about money and its creation and everything. So it's kind of exciting to see you all. I'm going to wait a couple more seconds till other people get in. I can start by, besides greeting you and welcoming you, I can say something about the Alliance for Just Money. It's, oh, Lucille corrected me last time, it's 3 years old. It's a newish organization to promote sovereign money. The idea that we don't need the banks creating the money all the time. We need it to be a service. We need money for the common good is Alliance for Just Money's goal. And besides the coffee house, we have a really interesting website. If people happen to be new here, special welcome to everyone who's new. And I recommend you give a look to our website. It is interesting. And if you sign as a subscriber, you have no obligation, but you get a newsletter every month with actual news related to the money and the money system. So at our coffee houses, we try to observe some basic guidelines to keep it welcoming for all of us. They're pretty simple. The main one and the heart of them all is respect, mutual respect for everybody's views, however weird they may sound to you. Share the air and help us make sure that everyone feels invited to speak. We really would like to hear from more people who think differently. That's all helpful. Trust everyone's good intentions. Here's one: consider your own position, your social position, your institutional position. And now I want someone to laugh at this. This is my idea of a joke. That doesn't mean that if you're very important, you should talk more. Considering your position means helping. Well, the fact is we need and value the perspectives of all kinds of people. So it's another way to repeat, trying to help everyone have a chance to say what they're thinking. And in the chat, let's mind our responses in the chat. Stay kind and avoid jargon and acronyms as much as you can when you're saying something. Use words that everybody understands if you can. And if you don't understand something, please ask for clarification. Those are our guidelines. Now I have the great pleasure of introducing John Howell and 3 women from the Athens, Ohio Women's League of Women Voters. They've been working most of this last year on making a proposal for the League of Women Voters related to money creation and our money system. So I'm going to turn it right over to John right this minute. Oh, Bo Young has her hand up. Does that mean I should call on you, Bo Young?
No, I'm applauding.
Oh. John, please go ahead.
There is an applaud button. By the way, a clap button.
Hey, folks, it's a little early for applause.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, I've compared to many of the people whose names I see on the figures here, I'm a fairly newcomer to this monetary reform. It's been about 11 years since Greg Coleridge began to talk to me and told me that banks created money. And I said, what? Isn't that counterfeiting? Doesn't government create money? Well, he explained a few things and since then directed me to the AMI, and I've learned a lot since that time. And so I've taken it to a number of groups, as a matter of fact, before, but there hasn't been any kind of effective follow-up for the most part. But the League seemed like an opportunity to do something through which there could be a follow-up. And of course, it's a national organization. And I'm going to, since many of you don't know much about the league. Some of you are from elsewhere and haven't probably had any contact with the league. I'm going to ask Debbie, who is currently the first vice president of the Ohio State League and is one of the members of our committee. She's also in our local Athens League. I'm going to ask Debbie to tell you a little bit about how the league works. And I am going to share the screen for just a couple of minutes here, a couple of less than that, about the league. Let's see if I can do this. Okay. Oh, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Slideshow from the beginning. Okay.
It always helps if you talk to yourself while you're doing it, John.
Yeah, I know. It's not very elegant, but this is the figure that I wanted here for you to see in terms of the League of Women Voters, that it's got 700 plus state and local leagues, 500,000 members. So it's a big organization nationwide. So just with that, I'm going to stop screen sharing and turn this over to Debbie.
Thanks, John. And thank you all for the invitation. This is kind of an exciting opportunity. So my job is to give you sort of a big picture view of the League of Women Voters, and then we're going to proceed to sort of plant it in the issue of monetary policy and monetary reform. So we are a 100-year-old organization. The league got its start with the efforts at women's suffrage in the early 1900s. And we are completely nonpartisan, do not support any candidates or parties, but that does not mean that we do not have major advocacy. There are issue priorities for the league that span a lot of different categories. As John showed you in the picture, there are basically three levels. There's a national league, and that's kind of where we're putting our attention, because that's where monetary policy conversations need to happen. And the National League has established positions in the areas of representative government, international relations, natural resources, and social policy. And underneath each of those, there are many different positions. Similarly, every state that has an organized state level league can establish policy positions in different areas that are important. And a local league can establish, perhaps for their own municipality, policy positions. And this is an important point, because if you are going to advocate for a legislation, for example, in the name of the League of Women Voters, with all the background of that history and all those members and all that work to back you up, there must be an established position. And these positions are created by a consensus and concurrence process, which is sometimes felt to be cumbersome and long, but they're very solid positions. And local leagues are asked every year to review either their state level positions or the national positions and give feedback to what needs to happen with those. What else did I want to tell you? So the question comes up, and Mary's going to talk a little bit about how we have worked within our own local league to get to the place where we are now with the monetary policy conversation. But I wanted to say that while we are not yet at a point, we are endeavoring to bring this to the National League of Women Voters in order to have it accepted as a position, as a formal position, so that we can act on it in the name of the league. And the reason, well, John will be talking about some of the reasons that the league is a good place for this to be, but In my view, I've been a league member for many years. I have a lot of faith in the
Thanks
values
for calling, period.
of the league and the work that are done by the men and women members. Virginia Hammond, we've had some wonderful help from your members, Virginia and Marie Werner and Pamela Haynes. Virginia made a comment early on in our local conversation, saying that what we really need is a national people's conversation. And I think when Pamela spoke to us, she talked about taking back our individual right to the conversation, to the terms of monetary policy, and giving up the feeling that it's too big for us individually, or too much to understand, or the job of somebody else to figure it out. So I think the league is uniquely positioned to host part of that national people's conversation. So that's why we're pretty excited to move it in that direction. And help lots and lots of other people sort of make the journey that Mary Costello and I have for the last year, which was from, I don't know what you're talking about, to I know a little bit more than I did 12 months ago. So, and I'm feeling pretty passionate about it. So with that, I think I'm turning things over to Mary Costello to talk about the local league activity. So,
Okay.
Oh, there
Thanks.
is actually a question. Are there any sister organizations to the league in Canada?
I personally don't know that. Debbie, do you know?
no, I don't believe so. I think the League of Women Voters is a strictly United States organization, although we partner widely with a number of organizations that I think are more international. Well, these are not, but we partner a lot with the American Civil Liberties Union, Common Cause, Sierra Club, depending on what the policy area issue is that we're working on. So the potential for cross international work is there, and certainly there are with international policy.
But there is an international federation, isn't there? Of League of Women Voters? I'm not sure. Anyway, I'll look into that. So I just going to give you just a little bit of an idea of our local league. There are local leagues all across our state, all across the country, and they vary in size from very small but intense to very large. Our local league is currently around 100 members. And local leagues focus on different things, and depending on the size and the people who are members of it may do more or less. Our local league has pretty consistently focused on supporting voters, our local area voters, by providing information to voters through our candidate forums and issue forums, and through the production of a voter guide for each of the elections, the primary. So our focus is to have our local voters go to the polls knowledgeably, to know about things, so that they can. But we also work to educate ourselves about various things, including the many positions that the League of Women Voters has. I mean, there are so many positions, and most of us have a kind of a smattering of an understanding about those positions. But annually, we get together about this time of year and either look at the state positions or the national positions and focus on a few of them, just to educate ourselves about what positions the league has. In addition, particularly recently in the last couple of years, we have organized what we call house parties. And especially with our need to do things on Zoom, we've been doing our house parties via Zoom, picking a topic that we want to know more about, but that is in the purview of the league positions, and inviting someone to come and educate us more thoroughly on that topic. And sometimes we even hold public informational meetings, wanting not only to educate ourselves about something, but to share that information with the public. And because we've been doing this kind of thing, that was kind of how we got started on this project, on the monetary policy project, because John brought that to us and we decided that a house party would be a good idea. As John said a couple of years ago, he said, what? The government doesn't create money? You mean banks do? I mean, that's my thought. There's just, we aren't very knowledgeable about this topic. So we thought it would be good to start there, have a house party, invite our members and learn a little bit about this. And out of that came a much more expanded approach, leading to our study, leading to the development of this proposal. So that's a little bit about our local league. There are so many topics and aspects that the league works on that sometimes it's like, oh, we can't take on one more thing, but we really felt this was a very core and important topic. So we've worked on it hard.
Okay, thanks, Mary. So I'll pick it up from there. And what we're going to do here is I'll talk through how we started this, how we got into it, the conversations that we had that led up to the formal effort that we've made over the summer. And I'll stop a couple of times along the way to make sure there's possibility for people to comment. There may be comments from those of the committee members who took part in this. And as Mary has said, or maybe Debbie said this, that Virginia and Hammond and Marie Werner were important parts of this too. So I am going to share the screen. That's because I'm a professor and I need my lecture notes, and so they're on the screen. So here goes. Okay, I think that's visible. Is that right?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, so if I can get the screen to advance here. It's not working. Why is it not advancing?
At the bottom left. Or your arrow button, maybe?
That's what I'm working on, the arrow buttons, and it's not doing anything. Let me stop screen share and get back into it and see if I can get this set up properly. Okay. You are screen sharing. Thank you. We'll go to the slideshow. Well, now there'll work. Okay. So this is the website of the League of Women Voters of Athens County, and you can see down here on the right, there's this new tab that has just been added, namely the Monetary Project. And that's where you can go to find this the proposal that we've generated. So this is the timeline of what we've done. I introduced this idea back, maybe it was December, but mainly in January. I think it went to the board to see if the board would approve of our doing something with this, and they did. They allowed us to set up an ad hoc committee, the Monetary Project Committee. And in February, we were meeting and put together this house party that Mary mentioned. And then we made a presentation at the state level in May at the Ohio League of Women Convention. Then, as I will show you, we promised them an educational series to go through the summer, June through October, which took place. And then in November, we had a meeting of the local league. All the members, all 100 members of the league were invited. Not all 100 participated by any means, but that was the consensus method that is used in those meetings by the league. And that got approval essentially by the members of the league. And then that was endorsed in December by the board, our local board. So this was the house party back in February. And I had essentially prepared a sizable document as a basis for this project. And so I'm going to show you a few slides simply taken from that initial proposal. So as it says here, the proposal arose out of a question proposed by an Athens League board member, which was me, as to whether the current monetary system facilitates or impedes the pursuit of league values and policy goals, and whether alternate systems might better serve those values and policy goals. So there is a document that the league has called Impact on Issues, a guide to public policy decisions. They update it every 2 years. And in this, there's the policy positions and the values are laid out very nicely. So I went through that carefully to try to find values and policy positions that seem to be important, that seem to be affected by the monetary system. So these are the 5 that I pulled out. The league's overall commitment to democracy, and the league's support of government programs to reduce or prevent poverty, the league's commitment to address climate change and environmental degradation. And then there were a couple of interesting ones that we'll come back to later. The league's position regarding the privatization of government functions and the league's promotion of responsible fiscal deficit policies. So this is a document, the Impact on Issues, which is published by the National League of Women Voters. And this is a little bit about the league. And I think Debbie already said all these things in terms of what the league tries to do. So this is more out of the proposal. So we indicated at the beginning that to understand why the monetary relative to these goals and why we're recommending a study, 2 things have to be understood. One, you have to understand how money is created in the current system. And then you have to recognize that the country is currently facing problems that require unprecedented federal spending outlays. So we listed the pandemic, the climate change, physical and social infrastructure needs, and maldistribution of wealth. And the point we were trying to make is that the monetary system impacts the availability of money to address these problems. And it went on to state then the purpose of the league study would be for the league members to gain an understanding of the current system and some alternatives. And for the league then to use that understanding to come to one or more position statements. And we did, in that initial proposal, I did suggest that we needed to look at alternatives, and there are alternatives out there, as we all know. And so that we had to spend some time looking at these alternatives. So I listed them here. And that's the transference of issuance of new money from the private sector to government, monetary reform, as we understand it in the Alliance, public banking, and local or complementary or alternative currencies, MMT, return to gold standard, I felt that had to be in there. Central bank digital currency. So these were the things that I felt we had to address. Okay, so at any rate, we worked on this, and this then, this information that I just talked about was presented at the house party. And then from there, we decided to take it to the statewide league. And this is the first slide of that presentation. And there, we just went over some of these same kind of things, namely that the monetary system affects government funding of programs the league supports. And examples are given here. Climate change, poverty, education, healthcare, and that the monetary system affects democracy itself through its effects on distribution of wealth and power. A lot of folks are addressing sort of the issue of political power, and that's important, but we all know that there's a link between wealth and power, so that if you don't address both the political and the power end of things and the wealth end of things, you're not going to have much influence on this distribution of wealth and power in the country. We had to define what a monetary system is, and so that simple definition is here, and we had to distinguish it from fiscal, because those two ideas are often intermingled and confused, and to make the point that the monetary system affects fiscal decisions. So we outlined again the purpose of the study, impact on issues, to look at the basic elements of how money is issued, look at alternatives, and to generate a position statement for lobbying purposes. Oh, I'm supposed to say advocating purposes. That's the term that the league likes to use, but they do have a group in Washington that does advocate. So I always show this slide at the beginning of these presentations, and the purpose of the slide is simply to demonstrate that the money supply continually grows. So this over a long period of time, well, the 1960s up to the present, and throughout this period of time, the money supply was increasing. And of course, it was a big jump. This is M1, but there's a big jump here. And what I tell people, don't worry about that. We're not going to talk about that. If at the end you want to talk about that, we can come back and talk about it. The only point here is that the money supply continually grows, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, but it continually grows. That leads to the question, who creates that new money? Is it the government? Is it the Federal Reserve? Is it private? And I always add this last thing because I've always given this, and when I've given this presentation in person to groups, and then I have them respond, okay, how many of you out there think that the government creates the money? And a few people raise their hand. How many people think the Federal Reserve? Some people raise their hand. How many people think the private banks? And a few people raise their hand there. But there are a lot of people who who are hesitant to answer because they aren't at all sure. And so I get a lot of hands coming up for D. I don't have a clue. And then I go from there to the fact, again, that you all are very familiar with, that there are two different kinds of money, the currency, which is bills and coins, and then the account money, which exists only in computers. And that this is, of course, the money we really use. We get paid with account money and pay our bills with account money. And the point is here that account money is 95% of our money. And all of that's created by private banks, not by government. What government creates over here is very small. It's coins. And for those of you who answered the question, say government creates money, you're right. But it only creates the coins, and it's a tiny fraction of the total amount of money in circulation. And for those of you who answered Federal Reserve, you're partly right, because the Federal Reserve essentially creates the bills we use. You'll note on them it says Federal Reserve notes. But again, the sum of bills and coins is 5% or less than the total amount of money in circulation. So basically, the money we have is created by private banks, not by government, and it's created in the process of bank lending. So I always summarize with these two monetary options, where we have money created by government on the left, money created by banks on the right. And in the center here, of course, is the economy with money circulating around. And in the case of government creation of money, the government spends it into circulation, into existence. It takes some out in taxes, but a lot of that is plowed back into investments in the economy as it supports infrastructure and other things. So in that case, money is created, well, as money, as a public asset. Over here on the other side, which is where we are with 95% of our money created by banks as credit. That money is lent, not spent, but lent into circulation. It circulates, does its thing, allows the economy to function. Of course, want you to pay it all back. So the banks expect that same amount of money to come back in repayment of the loan, plus some interest, which leads to this remarkable phenomenon that the very organization, the very institutions that we ask to create our money, take more money out than they put in. And you say, wait a minute, that's not possible. And of course, it is only when the lending occurs at a faster rate than the repayment. But if the repayment, if the lending slows and then the repayment continues, then the money will decrease. So that's the way our current system works. Well, and you all know that who are listening to it. I'm not telling you anything new. I'm just telling you that this has been an effective way to introduce this idea to people. So then the idea is, well, what are the consequences of this money system that we have? Well, what we have is concentration of wealth in private hands. And, you know, and in our presentation, we talk a little bit more in detail about these things. I'm just listing the topics here. So concentration of wealth in private hands, rising government debt, austerity because the government is limited by, can we afford it? Do we have enough revenue? This kind of thing. And so in a sense, that's a form of austerity, limiting government unnecessarily, really, from doing the things that it should do. An unstable economy with booms and busts. So these are some of the consequences. Here's the austerity thing. Can we afford it? And the point to be made here, as you all know, is when governments create money, they can afford anything, but only within the limits of available physical resources and labor. That's the real thing that limit what a people through their government ought to be able to do. Money should not be limiting. So more consequences of wealth concentration in private hands because we're paying interest on every dollar in circulation. Government borrows, so wealth flows from taxpayers to those who lend to the government. And we get this enormous imbalance of net worth and debt. And this slide has always been an effective one. It's a few years old now, but the basic information hasn't changed much. And again, you're all familiar with this in terms of the top 1% of having 35% of the U.S. net worth and a rather small percent of the debt. They have some debt. Rich people take out loans. And here's the next 5%. Now the 5%, here's 10%, you see, with most of the wealth. But most of the debt here is on the people down here. So we have a system that creates money as debt, and some people get the money and some people get the debt. And I like to remind people of this quote, and I think all of you on the call are probably very familiar with it, but it's an effective one. We can either have democracy in this country or we can have great wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, but we cannot have both. And everybody is aware of this enormous concentration of wealth that's now occurring in the country. So also is what an important part of this presentation, again, to the statewide league was these are the kinds of things that the league wants government should do. I don't have to read all these things, but you can see they have to do with being responsive to the will of the people, equitable, flexible system taxation, interest in conservation and development of natural resources in the public interest, concern for economic and social welfare, social problems that affect the general welfare, and they're interested in international things and promoting a sound economy. All this is well within the league's purview. So we go through the specifics of these things, climate goals and policies. Again, these are all statements directly from impact on issues. These are all quotes. More quotes about the need for federal government to fund basic agricultural research for safety of our food supply, education, employment, and housing, equal access to these things, a healthcare system that provides affordable access to a basic level of quality care, with a heavy emphasis on behavioral health, So these meeting basic human needs, and this is an important one. This is, you know, historically, this is a women's organization, although it's now open to men. And so out of this concern for meeting basic human needs, this is understandable coming out of a women's organization because they're the ones who historically have tended to those things. So the League is very supportive of legislation to help in this direction. I told you about this interesting thing about the privatization of government functions. And you know, well, you all know that essentially we have a privatized money system. It was formally privatized by the Federal Reserve Act. And but anyway, what the League says, that privatization, if it occurs, should ensure transparency, accountability, positive community impact, and preservation of the common good. So how's our current system doing on those issues? Well, we come to that later on. So at the end of this presentation to the State League, we said what we're going to do is we're going to establish a preliminary study committee, and that's basically the committee we have. We're going to schedule a 5-month series of educational meetings on Zoom. And then in doing this, so we're going to seek concurrence on a position statement from local and state league chapters. And we're going to try to present a proposal for study at the 2022 League of Women Voters National Convention. Okay, I'm going to pause there before I go on to talk about what the sessions that we had over the summer and invite any input that anybody from the committee wants to make at this point. And I'll stop screen sharing and any questions that anyone has at this point.
John, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
You're talking about the money creation. It's my understanding that the Fed holds something like 15% of the treasuries on its balance sheet in normal times, 10 to 15, let's say. Would that be an additional expansion of the money supply by the government, at least government money, you know, real bank money, on top of coins and bills?
Well, this issue is whether you regard the Federal Reserve as part of the government or not. The Federal Reserve is buying those treasury notes, as we know, and in doing so, essentially creates reserves. Those reserves are transferred to the banks, and then that gets converted into real money. So I think it's a matter of how you look at it. I think in the Canadian system where you're coming from, Joe, it's really easy to think of your central bank as a part of the federal government. It's a little harder for us south of the border to think in that way because the structure is a little bit different. So anyway.
Well, what I meant was, I mean, normally people will say 95% of the money is created by the private banks, and only 5% is coin and bills, right? And I'm just wondering where this central bank money is. It's not bank money, or private bank money. Isn't it real money? And therefore, isn't that also an expansion of the money supply over and above that 5%?
Well, if you look, for instance, maybe we ought to hold this discussion until later. But let me just say quickly that if the central bank buys a corporate bond, and they have bought a lot of corporate bonds, then what happens is the money starts as reserves, but it goes to the bank that gives real money to the corporation. The corporation gets real money. So that has created the money, and it's the banks that created the real money. Now, the Federal Reserve may have driven that by their asking the banks to buy those reserves so the Fed could buy it from them. But it's the banks that create the money. And you can go through the same logic in the case of even buying US Treasuries. Ultimately, the additional money is always created by the commercial banks.
Joel, thank you. Joel, thank you for that question. I'll tell you, this is a big coincidence. I don't usually think about that detailed bookkeeping stuff of how but today I was thinking about that same exact question, and it interests me. And as John said, I think it's a bigger discussion, and I think it's kind of outside. Really, tonight I am so excited to see that there are women in our coffee house, women working on understanding the money system and learning something good to do about it. And I think most people here are eager to continue learning about this process within the League of Women Voters to bring money, the profile of the money problem up to a wider audience more than the details right this minute. Does anyone else have a different question or comment about the process so far or about the program?
Go back. So where we are in this process is we've made this presentation to the state league, and we promised them to do this educational series. So now we're going to talk about what happened during this educational series, because it was kind of interesting. It sort of didn't go exactly as I had imagined, but it went in a remarkably good way. So again, I'm going to go back to screen sharing to help me talk through this. Okay, let's see. I think this must be it. Through this. And go to slideshow. And from current slide. Come on. Okay, well, let's go through the, oops. I guess we were at the right place. Okay, so this is session 1. We started June 23rd. And my idea basically was to start with a presentation of how the current money system works, then turn to how the system would work under monetary reform. And then we would go look at these other things in sequence. And then we would come back and analyze them all and compare them all and rate them all with numbers. And I'll show you how I intended to do that, which turns out didn't work. So with the first session, I talked about the government's role in the monetary system, the Federal Reserve banks, and the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. Remember, those are two different things. Commercial banks and shadow banks. And I talked about the participation of each of those in the money system. And out of that, what I wanted to emphasize is this business that there are two kinds of lending. And there's lending of pre-existing money. And this is what you and I do when we loan money. And it's what non-banks do when they lend money. When a mortgage company lends money, it doesn't create it, okay? It's just taking pre-existing money that it got from somewhere else and is lending it, okay? So lending is important in society. I think many of you read the David Graeber book, Debt, the First 5,000 Years. And debt, lending and debt are just an intrinsic part of the social interactions that occur as part of the glue of society. But the other kind of lending is coupled with money creation. And here you see that this is what depository banks do. Depository institutions, banks are depository institutions because you can deposit money there. You can't deposit money in a mortgage company. They're not a depository institution, okay? So what the banks do when they make loans is they create new money, okay? And only the banks do that. So the idea of this whole curriculum was, yeah, we're going to talk about the structure of the structure and function of the monetary system in the first one, all the stuff, banks, shadow banks, cycle of money creation, borrowing and lending, and the consequences of the current system. Well, as I said, this is a lot, but all of these items will be revisited in subsequent sessions. And keep in mind, we knew very well that we weren't going to have all the same people in all the sessions. There would be people coming and going as their schedules permit, as they remembered to come in. So we realized that in each session, we were going to have to kind of go back and review a little bit what we've done from the previous session before going on. The second session in my design was that we would talk about monetary reform, and namely transferring money creation from private banks to government. Well, it turns out what I did with this particular one is I talked about the history of money and this sort of continual competition there was between private creation of money and government creation of money. So I went back to classical times and on through the Middle Ages and the Bank of England and then the American colonies and through American history with the populist movement and so on. And I got up to the point of introducing the Chicago Plan and then the Need Act. I talked about it in that session. The third session, then we talked about complementary currencies. Okay, so these are proposals short of reform, but they do address some of the problems caused by the present system. So we talked about that. And I think in this session was when Marie Werner came in and we had her kind of give an introduction that kind of went over some of the stuff that were in the first two sessions, but from her own perspective. And I think that was very helpful to the people who were listening, in part to know that there was somebody else, not just this guy in Athens, Ohio, who kind of thinks along these lines. So it was helpful to have Marie participating in that. In the fourth section, we talked about public banking, and I got Pamela Haynes to come in from Philadelphia. She's working on the public banking in Philadelphia, and she talked about public banking, and that was good. I confess I didn't get anybody who's really an MMT person to come in and talk about MMT. I tried a little bit, but didn't try very hard. And then I ended up summarizing this as in the best possible light that I could, given my own understandings. So, and then we were going to go on to then ask, we will now have considered all these alternative systems. And now we can say, well, how do these alternatives compare in addressing the League's commitment to each one of these things? In meeting 5, it was to democracy and economic justice. In meeting 6, to prevent poverty. Meeting 7, climate change, and so on. Well, the way I thought this would be done was that we could have them essentially rank these various proposals with regard to how well they did with each one of these things. So the idea was, I had the idea that we could get some quantitative data here. We could get some quantitative data by asking them to fill out this thing and rate how they thought about how the present system, how it did with democracy, how it did with DEI, how it did with anti-poverty, and so on. And then do the same thing for monetary reform and then for public banking. And I actually separated MMT into theory and practice. And then mutual credit systems and privately issued currencies and central bank digital currency. Well, we actually asked this in specific multiple choice questions that asked them to rate each one of these things. But we offered an option that said either you rate this sort of 1 to 5 as I've suggested here, or we had the option that I don't have enough information to answer the question. Well, it turns out virtually everybody chose that in every question. So we weren't making any progress here in terms of moving toward a consensus process through bringing our ideas together. So what that meant is we had to rethink things. And in rethinking things, then we came up with the idea that let's just think through. I mean, we had been talking about the money system, so people had learned a lot already. Now let's just talk about what features of a money system would be needed to support League values and positions and issues. So this is the list we came up with, and this is basically the heart of the proposal. That we came up with the idea that the money system should be a convenient medium of exchange. That's obviously not very controversial. That it should have a steady value of money, free from economy-wide inflation or deflation, regardless of increases or decreases in the productive output of the economy. And that was a money system that allowed for increases or decreases in the money supply in ways such that economy is stable, eliminating extremes of economy-wide booms and busts, so that no one is systematically privileged, that money creation is fair and equitable and benefits all, not primarily a subset of the population. 5 was the nation is able to spend what is needed to meet human needs and address climate change, limited only by the productive capacity of the economy. The system should allow for the creation of money in such a way that it is not that the creation of money itself is not used for private profit making or gain. That the benefits of the first use of money should go for public good. 7 was a creation of national money supply does not require increasing debt. You can imagine there's quite a bit of discussion about that one. The creation of money is not dependent upon economic growth for system stability. And this is a big and difficult issue, the growth issue, because much of what we talk about in terms of monetary reform is to be able to have the system be able to grow to meet its needs. But we can't have growth forever because we got a finite planet, and we have to kind of figure out how we can accommodate a no growth system. And finally, the last one, actually, this one was suggested by, why do I blank on name?
By Ryan. It was Ryan, I think.
Well, I think it was Virginia initially, but Ryan and Virginia were working together on this because Ryan came into the committee too, and she played a role in this. Yeah, you're right. Thanks, Debbie. So the idea here was that a national system of money needs to connect to global and other national systems in a way that privileges no nation and allows people of all nations to benefit from the first use of their national money and supports a sustainable future for all. So anyway, this is basically what we came up with in this process. And we used the last 4 or 5 sessions then to essentially talk about these things. And we went through each one of these, where we had 2 sessions in which we wrapped up this whole thing by talking through these 9 features and in some detail. And then in each one of those, what we did was to ask people the following question. So we had a questionnaire, and those of you who have looked at our thing on our proposal online will have seen this. But with regard to each one of those values, we asked the participants to answer this question, thinking in terms of league values and positions and issues. How important do you think it is for our money to have a steady value, less prone to inflation than the current system? Now, that was item number 2 in that list above, as a matter of fact. Okay. And so because, people wanted to look back and say, wait a minute, where's the discussion to that? So here's where it was discussed in the proposal. Because you remember in the proposal, we have a study section. That's the bulk of it, where information about each of these things. Anyway, we went through this with not just this value, but each one of those league values, that each one of the features that we talked about, and asking how each one of those features, how important that is with regard to a monetary system. And we got all the answers that everybody gave were either very important, and that was most of them, and a few said important instead of very important. So basically, we had a consensus formed that all of these things were important, and that's then what we took to our local league for approval. So that's where I want to stop and open it up for any questions or comments of any kind. And if you let me stop screen sharing. If we want to take a little stretch break now, that'd be a good time. Is that what you want to do, Mary?
Do people want to stretch, or should we just keep on going? What does everybody want? We aren't really used to taking a break. If somebody doesn't need it, let's let it go.
Can we take a 5-minute stretch and bathroom break?
5 minutes, you want?
Yeah.
Everybody go along with that?
Yeah, I
We'll
love the
run
new,
around the house twice.
yeah, I love the new term that I learned from some of the younger people in this group. It's a bio break.
Yes.
Okay. So I have 8:58 according to my watch. So at what am I, 4 minutes after, or something like that, we'll be back together and carry on. And so meanwhile, you can think about exact questions you all want to raise about this process.
Very good. Thank
Okay.
you.
John, is that the end of the formal part of the presentation? And the rest is Q&A, or is there any more presentation?
Yeah, I think that's basically it.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I thought we could get the whole thing in basically in an hour. So that would leave an hour for general questions and comments.
John, in the chat, there's already a request for your excellent, well-organized and thorough slide set.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm happy to share the slides with anybody who wants them. Right.
The question was, how do we bring the information beyond our local league? And great question. We're in the process of figuring that out to a degree now. But during this extended seminar that John discussed, we had probably a regular participation of 15 to 20 people from around the state of Ohio, as well as Marie and Virginia and several others from out of state, focused particularly on some of my colleagues from other local leagues in Ohio. And they are currently working in different stages of taking this proposal to their league board, to their local league board, and saying, could we do an educational presentation to our members to, kind of gin up enthusiasm and the sense of importance of this issue. We have access to contact information for local league presidents from around the country. We have a liaison to the national board who's helping us out. The national organization has established a simplified means of proposing a study to the National League. So we're an online way to do it and get it out to all the leagues. So we're in the process of figuring that all out. I have liberally offered John and Marie and Virginia's services around everywhere. I tell anybody who asks that they would be willing to do a presentation by Zoom for your local league. And nobody has tried to shut me up yet. So I'm presuming that they're willing to continue that. I have to say that one thing we're up against within the League of Women Voters, Mary Costello said earlier that, we're, we're housed in voter services and access, and, we are sort of all about everybody getting to vote. And those of you who are in the United States are probably quite aware, and maybe beyond, but we have got major challenges with voting access, with state level legislation that's going on, with national legislation that's limping through a very painful process. And what that means is that in many local, state leagues and national, most of the oxygen is being taken up by this voting access issue. So, we're all very, very hooked on the idea that available funding for the public good is, undergirds everything we have wanted to do for 100 years in the league. So, that's that's the impetus for continuing on. But it's going to be a difficulty getting attention as we go on. But there you go.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Lucille has a question.
Yeah, thank you, Debbie, and all of you. Great presentation and very exciting work. My question really is just a follow-up to what you're saying, and I kind of wrote it in the chat, but you know, you now have this under your belt, and the result is both the process you went through the learning process, and do you recommend that other leagues stand on your shoulders in using your proposal or not? You know, because the learning process, even though you couldn't rank you know, the different alternatives, you learned about it through that process. You learned about the existing system, its flaws, and alternatives out there, and you were really able to distill, though, you know, what's priority for the league. And do you recommend other groups use your proposal and start there, or not?
I think that well, I don't know, this group may well disagree with me. I'm very new to the complexities of what has to be considered, but I think that having created those 8 or 9 characteristics of a money system allows me as a league member to be able to use those characteristics, not to come at them and say, here's modern monetary theory, here's, you know, digital currency and all that. Although it's pretty interesting, but to say, here are the values and the characteristics of what we want in a money system, and this is how it links up directly with our established positions. And that's the way I would recommend league presentations going, because you know, as I say, that's kind of what hooked me in the first place. Is, yeah, we've got all these values and goals within league, and we we advocate for pieces of legislation as they come along, as the legislative proposals come along. This allows me to evaluate all those as a league lobbyist, a volunteer lobbyist. So yeah, I think I would focus on those 9 characteristics. I keep forgetting 8 or 9 characteristics rather than the specific weeds of the money system. Does that help?
Yeah, I think in short, you are saying to use the proposal as a springboard for understanding the issue and how it relates to league priorities and values.
But you're right, it does make sense to slow down for people like me and do the groundwork and help bring people along, even though, you know, as with so many other things, there's this parallel sense of urgency about getting something done. So it's hard to.
Very good. Thank you. There are lots of ways to ask your question. I'm always tempted to raise my hand this way. As much as you're able, it's easier for everybody if we try to go to the part below the pictures on your screen. There is a little happy face with a plus sign, and in it is an option to raise your hand, just in case you're a new person to Zoom. Sorry for those people who already know this, but we have that raise hand feature. If you have a question or comment, we would love to see that. Oh, look, Jeff Eater is demonstrating raise the hand. And then, oh, we have few people with the hand raised. Thank you. Go ahead, Jeff. Oh, you're muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, there's two things that I suggest, and this is completely in line with what Debbie just said, to try to keep the message as simple as possible as far as money creation, because we know how deep you can get into it. And I would immediately suggest not even to mention shadow banking or MMT, because that will just create confusion. AFJM knows the roots of it, and I don't think you really have to go much further unless people have a genuine interest in knowing all those particulars. That's my suggestion.
Thank you. Would one of the Athens team care to comment, or should we go on to Bo Young?
Yeah, I just want to say briefly that you're absolutely right, Jeff, that you want to stay out of the weeds as much as possible. But there are questions that come up and you have to be prepared to deal with them when they do come up. So you have to have thought about these things and have reasonably straightforward answers. But you're right. You have to keep things as simple as possible and stay out of the weeds.
Thank you. Bo Young.
Well, first of all, thank you for a wonderful presentation. It's really heartening that there's some inroads being made. I have a comment and then a question. So one comment, that a year ago around this time, people from the league like Debbie and Mary Costello didn't know much about monetary reform, and that a year later you're saying that you are pretty passionate about this issue, that you see this as a core issue, and that you actually have a tab on your website for the monetary proposal. I mean, I think those are quite significant, even within the span of the year. So that's one thing. The other thing is we want to actually replicate this kind of success, and it's not going to happen overnight, and you showed that it is a process. My question is, John, when you were doing that whole series of teaching people about all these different alternatives, right? And then you did the second part where you realized things weren't going that route and you kind of shifted gears and you worked on the features to dialogue to speak to their values and their priorities as the league. I'm wondering if I could ask Mary Costello and Suzanne or Debbie to speak to this question. How important was that first part? Like, could John have gone right to the features piece immediately, or did you need that time to understand sort of the landscape that you were dealing with in order to get to where you got to with the features piece? I'm just wondering.
For me, it was helpful to have some understanding of, first of all, I needed to learn about our current monetary system, and then to have some understanding about alternatives. Maybe not, I don't know how significant it is to have an extensive understanding, but I think it's probably important to know that our money system, our current system, is not the only one. You know, it's not the only way to approach money in a society, in a government. So in that way, it was helpful. And I'm thinking there is information in the study guide, the more expanded study guide about some of this that people could refer to. But I think that the primary focus should be on those 9 features. But I also think it's very important to understand how our monetary system works, and that there are alternatives to the way that ours is.
Does that answer your question, Bo Young?
It does. If I can ask a follow-up either to Mary or anyone from the league, was there a specific something that kind of like, oh, that was the light bulb went off, you know, something sort of switched for you? Was there something like that within the course of the last year with this this program?
Yeah,
Hmm.
I would say for me, I don't know if John's got it available, but there's a slide and maybe you've seen it. It's just a graph and it's like, it shows up here, this is where all the wealth is concentrated, which I kind of knew in the United States, which I kind of knew. But at the other end, it's down here, this is where all the debt is.
Yeah.
And that was it. That was the light bulb moment. That was like, holy cow, we've got to do something about that. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, Boyoung, or should I move on to Fernanda
Oh, I just wanted to see if Suzanne or Mary had anything
to add?
regarding their light bulb moment.
Uh-huh.
That graph surely was a very powerful, you know, it says it all. And as Debbie said, we kind of know this, but to see it right there, very powerful.
Suzanne?
I think what I would say is that from working with John all these years, if you present a solution, like solution to the money issues, without people understanding that it's a problem, you know, their eyes just go blank. What do you mean we need to reform the money? You know, people don't have an understanding of how our money is created and what that means in our economy. And so they think this is really, they're not sure what to think about it, period. And so to present a solution before people know there's a problem is what I want people to understand. People have to understand what the problem is before a solution makes any sense.
Great.
Excellent.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, I think Fernanda was next, and then Joe, and then Dan. Go ahead, Fernanda.
Yeah, such a relatable conversation. I'm just thinking back right now that you talk about solutions when you don't understand the problem. That's the same steps you take in talking about climate change, and still there seems to be lacking understanding of the problem in some sectors of society. It definitely had a light bulb moment or a jump out of my seat moment when I saw that the chart that John said was like to gather quantitative data, and I was like, okay, yay. And knowing all of the sides of the monetary reform. So I'm understanding it as like, they are all subsets of monetary reform. So we're just presenting the various alternatives. And then when we get to the discussing solutions, when everybody is at the table and has educated themselves enough to discuss the differences and benefits of each of these solutions. I was just wondering what the approach is going to be then, and if all of the features, for example, the 9 values and positions, if they're all compatible. So there's that one point that was very popular in the chat about number 9, meeting the human needs, addressing climate change, and that every economy will have same semblance of power on a global scale, which is really challenging right now. I was just wondering, given that the League of Women Voters I just saw is in favor of privatization, I was just wondering what the AJMF stance is on that, and if that's a compatible value with that point about getting every human's need met, because privatization, I don't know, I've always experienced it as something with a negative connotation, being Mexican. We had a whole revolution about that shit. So just curious about the stance of other people on this chat, and if anyone wants to share their opinions. Sorry for the confusion.
Fernanda, can I ask to clarify your question? I didn't, I wasn't able to follow it as well as I wanted to.
Mhm.
So you understood that the league is in favor of privatization and you're
Yeah.
asking about that.
Yes, I'm asking
Okay.
about that. And
Okay.
Let me respond to that, please. That the issue about privatization is something that came up in the league back at the time when there was a push to privatize Social Security. And a whole lot of people in the league were really worried about that. Were really quite opposed to it. So as a matter of fact, what came out of that was not a clear statement that said, don't privatize any government function, because there wasn't consensus on that. But what there was consensus on was the fact that there is a potential problem if you privatize essential government functions, and in doing so, essentially take away from democracy. So the league is certainly not in favor of privatizing the money system. They never said that. They did say that there may be things that can be privatized, and that's okay. But if you do, you have to make sure that it serves the common good, it's accountable, and there's transparency. So don't think that the league is in favor of wholesale privatization of things. That's just the converse is probably true. But I want to say one other thing in response to Fernanda, because you put a good question in the chat. And that is, what about move to amend and the idea of constitutional amendment that says corporations are not people? And what I would say to that is that these problems that we have are complex problems. They involve both wealth and power. No one solution is the solution to everything. You can change the money system as we would like to do. And that gives the opportunity for government to do some things that it's not doing, which it could do or could botch. We don't know. But the point is, there's a lot of other things that are absolutely essential for the kind of things that we want to happen in this country and around the world. We're in favor of democracy. And what that means is that we need changes in with the kind of things that the move to amend people are involved with, and we need changes of the kind of things that the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund is involved with. All of these things are important aspects of this attempt to rescue out of this cauldron that we're in, to rescue some kind of a respectable democratic process that can exhibit some degree of social justice. So it's important to remember when we go proselytizing for monetary reform that this is not the solution to every problem. This monetary reform is a means to an end. It is not the end in and of itself. What we're after here is a country with some social and economic justice. We want a country that has real democracy where people have a fairly equal say, not overwhelmed by the concentration of wealth and power in a few hands. So your question is an absolutely vital one. We are part of a larger picture. And I think this monetary reform movement is not the answer. It's an important answer. And that's what we're striving to move toward. But we have to do this in cooperation with other people who have approaches to these problems that share our goals, but are working on different aspects of it. So thanks for that question, Fernanda.
If I could say just one more quick thing about the privatization issue. It developed, I think, similarly to our evolution and coming around to the 9 characteristics of a monetary system, a valued monetary system. The league, I was just looking at it, the league's, the national position on privatization is basically, in the event that any function is considered for privatization, we want for all these characteristics to be in play. And there are 18, I'm not gonna read them all. There are 18 bullet points, 18 characteristics of a reasonable and responsible privatization of a function. So Yeah, I was kind of horrified to hear you say that the league supports privatization, because I think by and large, not really. But if it were to come up, the formal position is follow all these steps. So that's all. Thank you.
Do you want to
Okay,
follow up, Fernanda?
Yeah, kind of just as feedback for the league to like consider how you phrase that, because when I did hear it, it was quite shocking and kind of a turnoff. So now to hear you clarify really helps. And I do approve of all of the 9 goals and those different give and takes for that situation. So thanks.
I'm really glad
Thanks
you
for bringing it
asked.
up.
Glad you asked. Yeah. Joe,
Great presentation, John. The fact that a whole bunch of people have asked for your PowerPoint is a tribute to how good it was. One quick question before I ask a longer question. Is the paradox of thrift or the householder fallacy part of the presentations or the discussions? John.
I don't even know what you're referring to, Joe, so you'll have to, so the answer is probably no.
I would say the answer was no. Yeah. No. Yeah, it was just that the householder fallacies is one of the things that I would say the anti-monetary reformers use. They're saying that the governments are just like you and I. The credit card is full and we can't afford to spend any money. And of course, you already established that it's a question of our actual resources as opposed to money. And the paradox of thrift is a famous statement by Keynes saying, if you spend less, you actually have less, right? If we try to balance the budget, we actually shrink the economy. Okay, my large question is this, and this is for the ladies. I noticed on your Facebook page, not your Facebook page, but the national Facebook page for the league, there were 123,000 followers. And my question is, how do we get to all 123,000? That sounds like a terrific opportunity for everybody.
I would not be the person to talk to about tweeting and twittering, but social media is really important, and there are some really smart people in Washington at the National League site working on that. Now, that said, it needs to become a league, an established league priority. So that's the mountain we need to climb in the next year or more to gather, because there are similar studies being put forward right now across the country on health equity, on arming school personnel, on cybersecurity. There are, as league members have this horizontal priority list. Everything is kind of number one and the most important thing. So that's our challenge. That's our challenge. But I think there are social media ways to get to people for sure.
Right. No, well, I wasn't thinking of social media. I was thinking of the fact that you have such a great following, and if you to expand your commitment to the entire league, that would be a really powerful step.
Yeah,
forward.
It would.
Yeah.
Well, let's pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, and then I bet you we'll have a little more space to talk about monetary.
Thanks again.
Yeah. Very good. Thank you, Dan.
There it is. Yeah, I'm with a Council of Georgist organizations named after Henry George, who launched the progressive movement in the 1880s. And there were 3 economic reforms that were primal, and the secret ballot, which was not an economic reform. We didn't have the secret ballot until 1888. And we got it state by state till most of them had it in 1896. But the the primary reforms were land monopoly, which they addressed by wanting a tax on land value. The money monopoly, which they wanted to address by doing very much what AFJM does, AFJM does, and what they called licensed monopolies, like electricity, railroads, private streetcar lines and things. And the view was that if it requires a license from government to do it, not just a certification that you're qualified like a doctor has, but an actual, you have permission to go from point A to point B with your service, the government should do that directly. And so that's the general background I come from. With regard to, you were saying you have to make it simple. One of Henry George's examples was the little girl who got an A in geography but never realized that the surface of the earth included her backyard. And the disconnect between what you see in front of you and the theoretical. And what we saw with the stimulus money was a huge asset bubble before we got consumer price inflation, which we got after the second stimulus. But we immediately got a huge asset bubble. And the way to, since that's on people's minds, the way to tie that in is you say, people got their stimulus money and they were saving up to buy a house, and that stimulus money got them just to the point where they could make a down payment. So they ran to the bank and they took their down payment, and the bank matched it like, 10 to 1 or 20 to 1. And so when they created that stimulus money, the housing is what went up in price faster than anything else. And that's not even on the consumer price index. But those asset bubbles do not come from government creating too much money. They come from banks creating too much money. Because you can only borrow money if you're buying something that the banks lend against, and they lend against houses. They don't lend against potatoes. So the consumer, the problem with issuing money is that it triggers the banks to do the same thing you're doing. And once you get that across, then you find out, yeah, we could increase the stimulus money. Would not have had much of an effect if the banks were not able to match it. So
Is that a question for the people who are presenting, Dan, or is it a comment?
I guess it's a comment, whoever wants to respond to it.
Going once, going twice?
Well, I don't think there's any need to respond to that. I mean, I think what Dan has said is true. The question is, what are the implications of that for these features of a monetary system that we have proposed? And in doing what we're doing, we didn't attempt to answer all these questions. What we basically did was say there seem to be some fundamental principles here, and whatever answers that people come up with for legislation or whatever should take these features into consideration. I don't think what we have done gives all the answers in terms of what ought to be in a piece of legislation. I do think if you look specifically at any one of these proposals and hold it up against these features, for instance, in this country, the NEED Act comes pretty good, comes out essentially meeting all these features, some more strongly than others. And if you look at these other proposals, some of them, that are short of monetary reform, some of them serve some of these functions as well. and some well, not well. So I think what we have tried to do here is to essentially set a kind of a criterion of consideration of specific proposals. How do they stack up with these features? And what comes out of this may not be a perfect solution to all of them. I don't know, but that's where we were able to get to, and I would suggest that in bringing people in, they can't get to the level of sort of debates that occur in this monetary group. This kind of thing that we have done is more accessible for people to say, yeah, that does make sense. And so that's where we are in our thinking. So thanks, Dan, for that contribution. And we should go on to another question.
Yep, thank you very much. Jeff Eater has his hand up, his virtual hand, and he's on mute. Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to address one of the other ladies who made a really good point, and it applies to us as monetary reformers too, when she said, what's the problem? Nobody even recognizes that there is a problem. And that's a real problem for us when we're trying to sell monetary reform. So, and this is also tangential to the privatization question. So one segue into monetary reform or people that are just learning about it is recognizing that banks are privatized. So the only way that money can come into existence is if they issue a loan, and banks only issue loans if they think they can make a profit. That's their prime motivation. So there's a problem, a huge problem right there. And that, you know, that's why they exist. And they're a business like any other. They're not evil or anything like that, but they're a business just like any other business. And they're mandated to make a profit. And they're accountable to their stockholders, and everybody understands that. If you tell them that banks are a business and they've been given this extraordinary privilege to create money, and their prime motive is profit, then you should be able to convey to your membership, like on the Women's League, that is a problem. So privatization, you know, to get that incredible gift to create money, that's a problem.
Comments?
Nobody here would argue with that. Thanks, Jeff.
Fernanda asks, go ahead.
I do have actually a final slide in which I had lessons learned, and I could share that with you at some point along here, and because they touch on some of the things that have been brought up in this discussion. Should I go ahead and do that at this point? It'll only take a couple of minutes.
Sure. And then I'm wishing that Mary Werner would have something to add about her experience with your group. Go ahead and share your slide.
Okay, let me come down here. Okay, let's see. That. Okay. Yeah, here it is. I think you can see this slideshow from the current slide. Oops. Here. So what are these lessons that we think we've learned, and probably any one of us who have written this, we didn't do this jointly. This is sort of what actually Susie and I came up with. So as she pointed out earlier, you start with the problems that people recognize and identify with, just like Jeff has said. So in our case, we use the values and the priorities of the league to show that there's a problem because the monetary system doesn't support these, and these are our values. So that's the way it worked with this organization. And it seems to me, in approaching any organization, that's the way to do it. They have their goals and so on, and we need to say, in order for you to achieve these goals, we probably have to have some changes in the monetary system. So you're right, starting with the problems. And the other aspect is to recognize that the problems are complex. Many solutions may have merit, but we focus on the centrality of the monetary system in contributing to many of these problems. Okay, and in doing so, we present the basics of how our current money system works. And that's just what Jeff said too. You got to start out with this business of the banks create money. Wow, I mean, that's the thing that knocked my socks off when I first heard this from Greg Coleridge. And we have to encourage thinking about changes in the money system, which will address these problems. So back to the problems that people recognize. And one way to do that is through this list of features, acknowledging that other changes and reforms might also be needed. And that's the conversation that we had about the move to amend and other things. There are other reforms that are needed. This won't solve all our problems. And in talking about the history, the question that always comes up, well, has anybody ever done this before? And of course, there is history here. And that history is useful to go through. And you all know about this: colonial money, continentals, greenback, and so on. So, and another thing that I think is important to realize is that people bring up concerns. You'll talk about this stuff and somebody will come up and say, what about Bitcoin? Well, you got to be prepared to be able to talk about this in the context of these features. How well does a Bitcoin do in counteracting concentration of wealth? Well, it doesn't do anything. It does just the opposite of it. And so you can hold it up to measure its effectiveness against these features that we've outlined. But in thinking about these other proposals and so on, I think it's always important to acknowledge what they're trying to do, the validity of their goals, and acknowledge strengths if there are some, and also their weaknesses and limitations. And we always have to look at the limitations of our own proposals, as a matter of fact, which there are some. And it's important to emphasize that this is the time for this discussion because changes are taking place. Our current money system is being challenged by digital currencies, and that will have an enormous effect. And there's things happening at the highest levels in terms of central banks because they find this a threat to their own dominance at the present time. So things are in flux. Things will change. Now is the opportune time for input on this stuff. Okay, that's my little lessons learned sermon, so I'll stop there.
Very cool. Thank you. Marie, yes.
Hi, thank you. So I don't really have a lot to add to what John and Debbie and Mary have said. I was really glad to be involved and glad to make a presentation to people who were already interested in looking for information. I did want to ask a question though, because I would like to get more information about what was happening before I arrived. And I just was wondering, John, how much of a relationship you had with the League and how involved with the League were you before you brought up monetary reform?
Yeah, I had been on the board of our local league. It's interesting. It wasn't long after I joined the board that I was asked to be, I joined the league, that I was asked to be on the board. And I said, wait a minute. And so Susie and I worked out a deal with the local board, the co-presidents. I said, okay, I'll become on the board if I can do this and share this slot on the board with Suzanne, so the two of us can do this together. So that's how we both got involved at the same time on the board. And so we worked on the board with a lot of different projects. I've done a lot of work with the league, the local league, in terms of our local candidate forums. I've participated in these as timer and as moderator and other roles in this kind of thing. So, and there are a lot of other committees that are active in the board, but it was the forums that I mainly helped with. So yeah, and what comes out of that is if you go to an organization, it's really helpful if they know you. Yeah. And so, it's almost a good idea if you want to influence an organization like this to join up. That's the first thing. You join up, Do some things with them. Show them that you're part of them, that you understand their goals, and their goals are your goals. And that gives you a whole lot of credence then when it goes to talking about something as obscure as the money system.
Yeah. Thank you. That was kind of what, because you seem to have so much credibility with the group. So yeah, it's good to have that background. I actually, you just quickly, I have sent I joined my local league back in early 2020, mainly because I was concerned about the upcoming election and wanted to work on, you know, voter registration and that sort of thing. So I've been wanting to bring this to them, but also thinking that I wanted to be more in your position, and I didn't want to just throw this out to people who I've barely gotten acquainted with. But I did go ahead and write them a letter recently because I realized that this is starting to go out to other leagues, and, you know, my presentation is being offered and I'm being, you know, spoken of as a member of this league, and they barely know who I am. So I did write them a letter and kind of explain the whole thing. And so it was another inroad, but it is interesting and edifying to know that you had that relationship before you brought this up, and it makes sense. Thanks.
Nice.
Beautiful, thank you. No one has their electronic hand raised at this moment, but maybe Ryan will have something to say about her experience in this process. Just another view of how those several study sessions went last summer and what maybe caught your attention in particular.
Yeah, I can share a little bit about my experience. And really enjoyed being involved with this process with John and the League of Women Voters in Ohio. And Virginia and I joined our local group in Portland, Oregon. And it has just been a fascinating and really great experience organizing with the League of Women Voters. It is a group that really takes information and dissects it and learns as much as they can before making a decision. And just to be around folks who process information in that way has been really great. And it's been exciting to see what the Athens group has been up to. And, you know, I think the biggest thing, to John's point, is being involved with other organizations first and being present in those spaces and really diving into what they're working on and making an effort to make those relationships. I think that's just the biggest takeaway, is fighting their cause and having that rapport before going in and saying, well, here's what you need to focus on. So I think that's just a really important point there.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Are there other questions or comments that we would like to take? We have just a few minutes left. Suzanne?
Yeah, John has talked to several groups about monetary issues and, sort of bringing it to their attention, but nothing has coalesced from these groups. I mean, we belong to the Quakers, and he's gone to monthly meetings and yearly meetings and national meetings, but the monetary issues with that group have never coalesced or taken off.
Not yet.
Yeah.
Not yet.
And the Quakers have a lobbying arm in Washington, D.C., the Friends National Legislative Program. And again, he's barely able to get on the schedule. So it's finding a group or finding a way to have a group coalesce around this monetary reform issue.
Thank you.
There,
Any,
a lot of people are interested in hearing about it, but the follow through is pretty minimal.
thank you very much. I see Lucille has her hand raised.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that sobering comment, Suzanne. It is really hard work. And, you know, if those of us who have been doing it and focusing more and more on it, then are less and less involved in other organizations that we would want to bring it to, that's a problem too. But why I raised my hand was just for a question. If those of you in the league in Athens and in Ohio can talk a little bit about what is your hoped for trajectory from here, both across leagues within Ohio, in the Ohio State League, and your hopes for at the national level, and what that would take for it to get there beyond the influence of Ohio.
Well, I can say something, and Debbie may want to say more about this, but the fact is that we can't give you a very explicit answer. What we know is there is a potential for the league to be able to take on a new issue like this, and we're providing a means by which that might occur. But it has to now work its way through local leagues and other around the country to have enough support at a national convention. My understanding, and Debbie can correct me on this, is there is a process of what's called concurrence at a national convention where somebody can bring up a proposal like this and run it through a process at the convention itself to see if everybody agrees with it through this concurrence process. So I have no idea. I mean, we like to think we might be able to pull that off. Well, will we be able to or not? We don't know. But at least we're going to do the best we can to get this word out to other local leagues so that they consider the issue. And maybe then if they've considered the issue, might be open to it, you know, at a national convention. Who knows? So that's what we have in mind. And it's kind of a long shot, or it's because we don't have much time for the leagues to take this under consideration. But we thought we ought to go ahead with this anyway, because we just thought it was the right thing to do. And I'm hoping that even if we don't succeed in 2022 of getting the league to adopt a position statement about the monetary system, we will have stimulated an education program around the country, this people's conversation, so that a lot more people know about this issue. So that's where we are in our thinking about it.
Right, and if you did happen to succeed, then the National League would be putting it on your Facebook for those 123,000 supporters.
Yeah.
So we're behind you. Mary Costello had something to add, and then Jeff Eder has his hand up. Go ahead, Mary.
Well, I was going to say about what John just said is that even if the National League doesn't adopt our proposal at this convention, and somebody just asked the question, the convention is in June and it is every other year. On the alternating years, there are state conventions. We want to go to the national with this. But if it doesn't happen this year, I don't, you know, leaguers aren't people who quit at it. And I feel that there's so much, there's such a lack of understanding of this issue. It may take a while, but stimulating a national conversation, conversation among local leagues and state leagues, it could take a period of time, but I think, you know, it's really worth the effort. The other thing I was going to say with regard to taking this to organizations and how do you connect with them, the thing that really, I guess, blew me away, or that really captured me, was the connection between the monetary system, our current monetary policy, and the league positions. The league has been advocating on the basis of these positions, which are generally about the public good, for 100 years. And very little legislation results. I mean, you know, we have these wonderful positions, these that are developed over time with a lot of input from the grassroots level on up. Very well thought out positions on the basis of which league lobbyists lobby and advocate both in Congress and in state legislatures. But, you know, not a lot happens. And when, you know, I would learn through this process that part of it is the way money is made available is a big part of the problem.
Right.
You know, when there's never enough money for the more humanitarian, the more public good kinds of things. There's always money for the military and, you know, for big business.
And we're starting to understand why.
Yeah. Well, it also has to do with values, I suppose. But I mean, I think if money were available in a different way to the government, if the government could produce this money that is needed to solve these really difficult problems, then maybe some of them would get attended to. So connecting to the values of our organization was really powerful for me.
Yeah, thank you, Mary.
Thank you very much. So Jeff, I think you're going to have the last question or comment before Ryan wraps this up.
Okay, I'm going to reiterate, and I'm going to address this to Susan Howell, because in my opinion, she's brought up the most important aspect of communicating this thing to the public, is nobody knows it's a problem.
Yeah.
She makes the best point of the night, I think. And admittedly, this is our problem for us to be able to communicate this. So I want to ask you, Susan, did anything I say resonate?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Okay, that makes me feel good.
Right
That
on.
makes me feel like I'm actually communicating the message. And I think that's where our starting point should be. I don't care if you're AFJM, AMI, PMC, whatever you are, but that's where the message should start, is with the problem, which is what Susan says. You know, if you tell them, well, the problem is that the, you know, privately owned commercial banks with a profit motive have been given the right to create money. And then, of course, the eyes are going to roll in the back of the head and whatnot. But then that's a segue into a deeper conversation. And I would also say to the ladies in the Women's League, I've produced a couple of pretty good videos on the homepage of PMC that directly parallels the American system. And I formatted it in the simplest way possible, but anybody can understand how we could actually take control of the monetary system. And there's two videos. So if anybody's interested in visiting the PMC site, you can directly parallel. You can just substitute the Bank of Canada for the Federal Reserve.
Jeff, please put the address in the chat, because there you went with an acronym, PMC, which not everybody here knows.
Right. What is it?
Okay.
It's the organization that Jeff spearheads, Positive Money Canada, and the address will go in the chat right now for
Progressive Money Canada
benefit. Oh, progressive, not, see, I got it wrong.
Oh, okay.
Right. Progressive Money Canada. Forgive me.
Okay.
Well, alrighty, go ahead, Ryan. I want to thank you all for an excellent presentation. I really appreciated it a lot. I learned a lot. And yes, Ryan.
Yes, thank you everyone for joining us tonight, and thank you to the League of Women Voters of Athens County, Ohio. You all have done some great work, and I'm looking forward to seeing where this proposal takes you all. Hopefully John, Virginia, and Marie get some calls from other League of Women Voters groups. But if you liked what you saw at tonight's coffee house, please consider donating. We are a largely volunteer-based organization. Every contribution helps support our efforts. And I also encourage you to sign up to our newsletter if you haven't already, to stay informed of what we're up to and when our next coffee house is. And check out our Get Involved page to see how you can join the movement. But thank you all for coming out tonight. And I hope you all have a great rest of your evening.
Let me say you are all welcome to join the League of Women Voters, because men are allowed in this. And so it's a good organization. And if then you're a member and then this letter comes to you, the president of your organization, and she looks around in membership to say, and asks a membership, do you know anything about this? You could say, I do, and be a part of that. So I encourage you to join the League of Women Voters too, if you're not a member.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye-bye.